a zero waste designer and a sustainability activist in Bangladesh. I've recently started the Bangladeshi chapter, as Pooja mentioned, with Slow Fashion Movement, and it's been amazing being the global ambassador. So a little bit about the brand that I own is called Broke, and the kind of work that we do is we do upcycling and recycling with garment surpluses and dead stock, and figuring out like how we can put it amongst people by talking about circular fashion. And there's a lot of advocacy on that part, like kind of educating people about why circular fashion is important, given the fact that Bangladesh is the second, well, now the third largest manufacturing industry in the world, country in the world. It puts a lot of pressure in terms of like access to natural resources and how we manage our natural resources, being such a competitive market leader in the world, providing clothes all over the world as well. So this sustainable development goals today would be like a really important session. So without further ado, I will get into it. So Pooja.
Thank you so much, Mehnaz, for your introduction. I shall share the screen right now.
Pooja, I think I can share the screen from my end, actually. Can you guys see it? All right, cool. So yeah, I'm sure like all of you over here who are part of the slow fashion movement are aware of the sustainable development goals, more or less. The two important goals that I will be focusing on today is the number 12 and number 13, which is responsible consumption and production and climate action. But before that, I just wanted to give you a brief introduction about how the SDG goals were formed and what they're primarily targeted towards. So it's essentially a set of plans and actions to mitigate global problems through various kind of partnerships among countries to protect the people, the planet, and to enforce prosperity amongst all people. And so how it formed was basically to like address the global challenges, which is eradicating poverty in all forms, and also like looking into like how we can reduce extreme poverty overall. And so the General Assembly and Sustainable Development Goals and the United Nations together have declared 17 different SDG goals, and with 169 targets to be formulated and spread across every country up until 2030. The reason where SDGs were formed was to mitigate the problems and to carry on the solutions that were not met by the Millennium Development Goals. So it was primarily like formed in order to like look into the stuff that was still remaining and what else we could do to like solve the problems globally and like help support the planet and the people as well. So the formation was basically through several series of conferences and like summits that were held across, such as like the Rio Declaration of Environment and Development, the World Summit, and the Sustainable Development, and so on. It was unified by the Charter of the United Nations Principles and their values, which was grounded by the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the International Human Rights Treaties. All of these together were basically giving birth to the 2005 World Summit outcome. And then we finally had these transitions of the Sustainable Development Goals. And so as we all know, there are a couple of areas of focuses that the SDGs look into. The interdependent factors that there are basically the economic factors, which are affected by the social factors and which in turn affects the environment, and it goes in a cycle. So these three are the fundamental area of focuses that the SDG goals were developed to cater for. And in order for the five components that we have earlier mentioned, like for the people, for the planet, to enforce prosperity and peace, and through local and national and global partnerships all across the countries. Now getting into the responsible consumption and production, which is the number 12 SDG goal, is to ensure sustainable consumption and production patterns. And to give you like a brief idea about the world synopsis, why we should be looking into it is because the material footprint has increased by 70% between over the last 17 years, where about 1 million plastic drinking bottles are purchased every minute, and 5 trillion single-use plastic bars are thrown away each year. So just that number itself kind of gives you that idea of like how irresponsibly we are producing materials, producing plastics and putting it out there without having any idea about how they're going to be disposed or how they're affecting the planet, the people, the biodiversity, and all of these components, right? For example, like the electronic waste that continues to grow. Like, for example, each person generates about 7.3 kilograms of e-waste, which is like laptops, phones, chargers, pencil batteries, like car batteries, and like so many different kinds of like stuff that are available. And out of which we only recycle 1.7 kilograms. So, and that's a statistic up until like 2019. So you can understand that the amount of recycling that is being done is not even close to what we should be doing, but let alone like recycling, the conversation is more directed towards that how do we create stuff more responsibly so that we don't even have to get to recycling, so that the products are more biodegradable or has a more longer lasting usage. But on the upside, because of these sustainable development goals and various partnerships and institutions and associations between local and international governments and NGOs, private and public corporations, there are about 700 different policies being implemented, which were reported by 2020 in order to take into consideration about the 10-year framework of the programs on sustainable consumption and production. So that's something that we can definitely take away as a positive. And so there are about 11 different targets, and the targets are basically identifying that are breaking down the responsible consumption and production into different components so that it's easier for us to understand like how do we measure them and how do we basically separate out our work and target each different industry or stakeholders that are responsible for these components. For example, like sustainable management and use of natural resources, right? And then another target is to like cut down the global per capita food waste by 50%. Another one is to responsible management of chemicals and waste. So the medical industry, the fashion industry are heavily noted for a large amount of like chemical dumping and like waste into the river systems, into the water systems, right? So that's what that is looking into. And then the target number 5 is sustainably reduce waste generation. So what slow fashion movement is looking into is the circularity of fashion, right? Like slowing down consumption and looking into like mending, repairing, rewearing, all of the stuff that we have been like talking about over the last 3 months as part of the campaigns that we have been running. Moving on, there are various different kinds of like encouragement for companies to adopt sustainable practices and sustainability reporting, which is really important because transparency and accountability are really important, because otherwise you cannot hold different organizations accountable or like brands accountable, right? There was a recent article, I think it just came out yesterday, where about 47 brands were set to be accounting for a high number of carbon footprint emissions. For example, like I have the article pulled up so that you can also refer back to it if you wanted to, is that where they're constantly talking about that these fashion industries, fashion companies are not taking any responsibility to reduce the carbon footprint. And if we are to get to the global 1.5 degrees Celsius of the global temperature, if that's the target that we want to reach at a short period of time, like I feel like it's going to be really difficult unless we bring all of the industry stakeholders under a mechanism where there's sustainable reporting and accountability systems. Moving on there about like promoting universal understanding of sustainable lifestyles is something that Kane will be like talking about like after my session. And I think that would be really important for us to like understand like how do we encourage people to like talk about adopting sustainable lifestyles. Then we have like support developing countries, scientific and technological capacity for sustainable consumption and production, which basically looks into like whether different countries have the necessary tools, technology, researchers, scientists, or like the kind of machineries that are said to produce like lower carbon footprint or are said to be more eco-friendly. And with those, you basically reduce more waste in the process and are gearing towards a more green industry in the future. So it's about helping out and creating different partnerships between countries that have more capacity to develop these things and provide it to countries such as like the developing countries who lack these kind of expertise or knowledge, and kind of create that partnership that we earlier touched based on to foster the sustainable development goals. And then there's of course like 12B is about monitoring sustainable tourism, because as we all know, when we're traveling, there's a lot of plastic like one-time use materials that are being used. So like unless that is taken under control, the biodiversity in the environment is at huge stake. And lastly, 12C is where we talk about removing market distortions that encourage wasteful consumption. So primarily like talking about different kinds of marketing systems and like mechanisms that encourage people to constantly get into that need of like trend buying. So unless and until like we eradicate those systems, it's going to be very difficult for like consumers to like reduce their purchase habits. All right, so that was the SDG 12. Now we're moving on to number 13, which is one of the most important goals that we have identified as for slow fashion movement as well, is the climate action, is where we are talking about like taking urgent action to combat climate change and its impact. So a brief idea or like a fact sheet about the scenario why we should be looking into this SDG is because like we briefly touched base on the fact that by 2020, the global average temperature was at 1.5 degrees Celsius and above. And this was pre-industrial baseline, right? And we are at a trajectory where we are not looking at things being very optimistic for us, because if we are to reach 1.5 degrees Celsius as called for in the Paris Agreement, there needs to be drastic changes as shown in the graph right above you, where we're showing the rising greenhouse gas emissions, which requires shifting economies towards carbon neutrality. So if you can see the trajectory, it's going straight up and it's not going down by 2050. In order for us to like do that, there needs to be collective efforts between every country and every industry in order to reduce our carbon footprint and take care of the climate necessary actions. So there are a couple of target areas. There are 5. So there's 13.1 to 13.3, which talks about strengthening resilience and adaptive capacity to climate-related disasters, which talks about, for example, like a country like Bangladesh needs to start building like their adaptive strategies in retrospect of the climate changes that are happening, because we are being impacted in a way, or like most developing countries which are climate change prone don't have the capacity otherwise to take proactive measures as of now, because either we are manufacturing based countries or we're heavily dependent on like industries that create a lot of carbon footprint. And are adversely affected because of different kinds of like climatic conditions, or like flash floods, soil erosion, tsunamis, and different kinds of climatic conditions that are happening because of actions taken by Western countries or like developed countries, and the developing countries are the ones which are being affected because of those actions. So here we talk about like how can we create like a good bridge between the Western world and the developing worlds in order to create that balance so that we help each other out in a way that we can start creating technologies and like strategies to like help mitigate some of the climate change problems as of now. Number two basically looks into integrating climate change measures into policies and planning, which is the first and foremost thing that we really need to start looking into, because it's otherwise in terms of the long-term goals or like long-term implementations, it's going to be very difficult. So unless there is policy level actions or like planning being done, it's going to be quite difficult. So over there is where we need like a synergy between like global partnerships for people to understand and communicate and get across the message that climate change is real. And we need to structure our industries, environmental regulation policies, our educational content, our marketing strategies. Everything needs to be in a certain way that it's aligned with the country level policies and like plannings. Number three basically looks into like building knowledge and capacity to meet climate change, is something that is also that Kane will be looking into, will be talking about with us like briefly. And number 13A is the UNFCCC, where we implement the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. And number B is where we promote mechanisms to raise capacity for climate planning and management. So all of these five components basically will hopefully help us gear towards the climate action and adopt and help us build different action points from like different stakeholders and like different levels of integrations. And just to give you like a brief understanding of like why these two SDGs are going to be so relevant for us, for example, in context of Bangladesh, because that's where I am residing. There's higher numbers of respiratory diseases, growing rates of cancers from air pollution and water pollution, accounting for over $2.5 billion annually in Bangladesh because of these different kinds of pollution that are happening because of industrialization. Over 5 million people don't have access to fresh, clean water in Bangladesh, whereas billions and millions liters of waters are being put into these industries to run them, to create the clothes that we are wearing, to create the different materials that we are putting out, which have very little responsibility in terms of recycling or even like disposal into the system. Just to put it in context, the amount of water that is being wasted from the textile industry in Bangladesh is equivalent to almost 20 Olympic swimming pools or like fields. And what the researchers are assuming that if we go at this rate, there will be no arable land in Bangladesh, meaning that there will be no agricultural land left anymore in Bangladesh if we keep continuing these kind of industrial projections. Moving on, I will summarize the textile industry impacts for you to understand that we produce about 80 billion globally items of clothing, which are delivered out of factories annually worldwide, which means that there are 30 billion clothes discarded in 1 year just in UK, which would fill the Wembley Stadium. There's about 95% of discarded clothing, which can be recycled or upcycled. We waste about 200 gallons of water to make one pair of jeans, the equivalent of 285 showers per human being. And in terms of, and about like 1.5 tons of clothing consumption clothing consumption produces about 1.5 tons of carbon dioxide, which is equivalent of driving like 6,000 cars per year. So it's incredible. The numbers are really staggering and really interesting to like look into, given the fact where Bangladesh is located in terms of the geopolitical position that we have. We are in number third amongst 5 countries with the most climate displacements, which means like we have one of the highest climate migrations in Bangladesh, moving across from like one place to another because of loss of land or because of inhabitable living conditions due to climate change. So, and recently we were said that Bangladesh has the worst air in the world, we ranked about 169th out of 178 countries according to the Environmental Performance Index for air quality, which is really messed up, actually. Well, in a way, because of COVID, we're all having to wear masks now. So at least that's protecting us to a certain degree. But that brings us to the question that what can we really do about it? So as ambassadors, as citizens, as global citizens, it's something that we really need to start thinking about, that what small actions that we can do in order to look into these two SDG goals. So I am Mahinaz, and I hope this was helpful for you, and I will pass it over to Pooja. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mainaz. This was such a clear and comprehensive presentation of the SDGs connected to fashion. I'm so glad that Kaina actually is going to talk about the implication of an individual to bring about difference and contribute towards attaining these global goals by United Nations. Kind of do remember that introduce yourself to us about a little bit about your brand as well, and then we shall start. Guys, the first segment was about Mahinaz and then Kaini, and the third segment will be the last 10 minutes when we can have an interaction. If you have anything to contribute, ask questions to the panelists, and please do feel free to ask us. And last bit, remember, if you want to join the slow fashion movement as an ambassador, as a volunteer in any capacity, feel free to drop in an email to ambassadors@slowfashion.global. Thank you so much. Kind, over to you.
Okay, hello everyone. First, let me introduce myself. My name is Kane. I'm from Indonesia. I am an owner and founder of Gaia. So Gaia is a sustainable fashion that are aimed to make people change the way they think of consuming fashion goods by using slow fashion product. We are focusing on creating sustainable ecosystem for local artisan communities, and we create clothing that are versatile in design with fabrics that are comfortable and travel friendly as they are good for the earth. So I would like to share with you guys, as we heard from Mahenas, that we're now facing a climate change and we are forced to shape our better future. So how can we do that? I will share the screen. Okay. Sorry. Okay. First of all, as a brand owner, I feel that we are responsible to educate our consumer. Not only a brand owner, but also as an ambassador of slow fashion movement. We should share and educate our social environment about what we're facing right now, because many people already know about, we're now facing climate change, but how they don't really know how to react about that. So the first of all, education means that we empower empower learner of all age with the knowledge, skill, and attitude to address the interconnected global challenge that we are facing, including climate change, environmental degradation, loss of biodiversity, poverty, and equality. So, as I mentioned before, as a brand owner, it's our intention to create beautiful product, but also to ensure their longevity and durability through appropriate care and maintenance. So, first of all, I just read this information like this morning from Fast Revolution. They said there's 78% of the consumer want brand to work to share detailed information about the environmental impact of their product. So it means that they want a transparency between the behind the our production, the behind the scene of our production, such as what materials do we use, what color dye that we use to our fabrics, and how to take care of our products. I think few people might still think that being a sustainable enthusiast not only buying sustainable clothes, but also how do we take care of the product that we already buy from the sustainable brand, such as how we wash our product. Do we use greenwashing, or we still using a chemical detergent or something like that? We also have to focus about how do we take care about the product, and how we react with our product that might have the product might need reparation. What we react about that? Do we want to just throw them away to the trash bin, or we want to mending our product to create a new look of product? We do a mending, such as I'm sorry, I feel a little bit lost. So okay, I'm sorry, next.
You got this, Kane, don't worry.
Okay, I need to calm down. So what is the aim of educate our consumer is to make them way more conscious about when they were making purchasing decision. They more conscious. Is it have a positive impact to the social, economic, and environmental, something like that. Next one, when we're talking about fashion industry, as we know that the fashion industry is the world's second large polluter behind the oil and gas. Behind the oil and gases, and only 15% of total fashion waste is donated or recycled. The remaining 85% of fashion waste ends up in a landfill. So I have a few solutions for you guys. There are 3 that I know, but maybe there are more, but I only know those 3. The first one is buy a biodegradable product, such as Textile. I can mention one big name. The name is Textile. Their fabrics is already biodegradable, so it composes way more easily. It only takes 24 to 36 weeks to be composed. It composes. It's decomposed by the action of microorganisms such as bacterial or fungi, biological. And also buying a biodegradable product is helping us to make a solution of the waste to the landfill, and also using this packaging. Packaging is also an issue because the first polluter is come from one single-use plastic. So using a cassava is one of the solution for us right now, because it's biodegradable and also compostable. And the next one, it's upcycling and recycling. You guys might wondering what the difference between upcycling and recycling. Upcycling is way more like we use our creativity to transforming our waste or our vintage clothes into new look, such as what I'm wearing today. I made this for my Raya Idul Fitri. If you guys know, it's a Muslim day to celebrate our fasting. I made this from patchwork cloth that are donating to my communities. It's a Setali, Indonesia. So we made it from the waste, and we made into a new outer that it's very cute. But also, I also have this one. This is my shirt from Zara. It's a fast fashion, but I turned it into slow because I upcycling my clothes into a new look. Look, I do apa namanya? I put a patchwork and also knitting like this. You can do this at home and just watch it from YouTube. There's a lot of information right there. And also the last thing is we can also recycling our textile. If you guys just don't have idea to make an upcycling product or something like that, you can send your textile or fabrics into a recycling center. And this is the new materials from the recycling center called Pebble in Indonesia. They receive many donation from around the world. I think it's from around the world because they already big right now. You can buy it, recycling product and biogradable product. Right now, it's a new innovation and new answer for us in fashion industry. And the last one is buying local product, also a good choice for us, because buying local product means that we support local artisan community, and it means we also support the economic growth in our country and also reduce the gas emission. And that's all. I feel so nervous. I'm so sorry because this is my first time to sharing in English. I usually represent in Bahasa, so I felt so nervous. I'm so sorry. But if you guys have any question, just let me know.
I refuse to understand why I'm sorry, because you were amazing, covering a segment where you're sharing about how as an individual we can make a difference. Trust me, you really added so much value to this workshop. Thank you so much, Kane. I will actually stop recording now, after which we can start with our question answer session, guys. So yeah.
Lovely journey, Kane. Thank you so much